All right, let's get started.
All right. So I'm going to begin with a quote. Principles for the development of a complete mind. Study the science of art. Study the art of science. Develop your senses, especially learn how to see. Realize that everything connects to everything else. Realize that everything connects to everything else. That is Leonardo da Vinci. And with that, I would like to introduce on the switch my friend Shrikant. Shrikant, welcome.
Thank you, Chase. It's delightful to be here.
So I'm excited to talk to you about this meetup that you have, your vision and your sort of ethos for exploring ideas. But I really want to start at the very beginning. I want to go back and I want to try to understand some of the basics of who you are. Give us some of your story. So who are you? Where did you grow up? As much as you want to explain about sort of your life story. If you could, split things into epochs, where you were then and where you are now. Start us with where you were then and how how that happened.
Wonderful. I love the idea of switch. So I'm going to tell my story as 10 switches. Okay, there have been 10 switches. 5 of them or 4 of them have been kind of in the initial phase of my life. 3 of them have to do with my approach to studying ideas on my own. And 3 of them have been related to my studying ideas in the meetup community or along with friends. So those are the three epochs. So let me start off. I was born and brought up, not born, but I was brought up in Bombay. So I'm very much of a city guy. That's a core part of who I am. Now I'm in New York. I came to America. I went from smaller town to bigger town to bigger town until there is no other place to go. I'm in New York, the center of the universe. But I have a very different relationship with New York. I love New York. My only complaint about New York is that there aren't enough people here. They are too far apart. It's too quiet. It's too clean. Because I grew up in Bombay. Bombay is about 13 times as dense as New York. So that's what I'm used to. So for me, New York is a very quiet beach town where I can think in a very relaxed way in the midst of a lot of input. So that's my perspective from where I come from. Now, in terms of switches, the first switch, and I think all these switches kind of build on one another. The first thing that I think, which was a big event in my life, is that I fell in love with physics and math very early. The idea that I could understand the world. I could figure out how tall the tree was across the river without having to be there, just by measuring shadows and things like that. I was very, very excited about that. And that was the first time that I kind of learned to use my mind. So that was a big thing. I grew up in go ahead.
Can I ask, was that the result of like a good teacher? Was it the result of a particular experience with math and physics? Or was it at some point you just suddenly noticed, oh, I can explore the world. I can understand things.
Yeah, I've been always very active in my mind, and I've been fairly bright. So usually, there were some teachers that supported me, but they were all kind of in the position of saying, oh, this kid actually wants to learn more, so let me give him more. So I remember some of my teachers coming saying that these are the assignments for everybody, and these are the assignments for Shrikant and this other person. Like nice. Every day, every time they would come, I remember one of the physics teachers who did that. But by that time, I already had the love. But the good thing about the Indian culture, one of the things I deeply respect about the Indian culture is that they value knowledge. So whenever anybody sees anybody genuinely trying to understand something, people just, open all the doors for them. So I benefited a lot from really generous teachers who gave me that. But the kind of the interest was there already, and I was already exploring it. These teachers just made it easy for me, to scale up from that.
Okay, makes sense. Sorry, continue on your switch journey.
Yes. So that so in order to explain switches, I have to tell you about before and after. So I grew up in a Maharashtrian or Marathi community in Bombay. And there are some great things about the Marathi community. It is very intellectual. It prizes education very deeply. But relatively, it is a kind of an insular community in the sense that most of the people that I knew, I was in a Marathi medium. And the interesting thing about that was that my grandfather was a teacher. And when time came for me to go to school, my parents asked him, should we send him to a Marathi medium school or an English medium school? And my grandfather's advice was very, very interesting. He said, you can either send him to English medium school and speak to him in English at home, or send him to a Marathi medium school and speak to him in Marathi at home. Because if he can really master one language and learn to think in it, he will do all right. He can pick up other languages whenever. So I ended up going to a Marathi medium school. So everybody that I knew was from a similar community. They thought the same way. It was the same culture. One of the big switches that happened was when my father got transferred to Bangalore, which is in South India. And there they don't speak Marathi at all. So I was picked up and put, that time I did not know any English. My English was at the level of cat sat on the mat. And I was picked up and put in 7th grade into English medium school. Okay. Now that was a stunning experience because I was used to understanding everything. And suddenly, people are talking to me in biology, about biology and geography and Shakespeare. And I don't understand the words that they are saying. So it was very hard. I used to cry. I remember that. And it was very, very hard. But to complicate the matters, I had to learn Kannada, which is a language which is from the Dravidian root. So it's not even an Indo-European language. And everybody in my class spoke Tamil. So I did not understand what everybody was saying. And the people who lived in my building were Sindhis. So they spoke Sindhi, which also I did not understand. So it was a sudden kind of being picked up from a community where I knew everybody. And I was kind of, I was doing extremely well in studies and everything. From that to place where I just did not know what was going on. And the amazing thing was that, I worked very hard. And by the end of the year, I was at the top of the class. And that was a very big thing for me, because what I really got from that was that I can take up some things which are very challenging and I can figure them out. So I have a tremendous confidence in my ability to jump into something and figure things out on my own. And I carry it. And it's not always a good thing. Sometimes I try to do things which can't be done and I break my head against the wall. I've learned slowly to recognize when there is a wall, but my default motivation is that, okay, we can do this. So that was the big, so that was the second big switch. The next one was that this was very early in computers, and computers were very, very hard to come by in India. And a friend of mine, his dad got him a computer. Okay. And the computers at that time were these boxes with little LEDs on it. Okay. And that's all it was. And both of us were so excited about it. They said, wow, we got a computer. Okay, what shall we do? So we said, okay, we have to write a program, of course. So we said, okay, let's write a program. So what program shall we write? Now, I was very good at chess. So the idea we came up with is that I will teach, and he did not know chess. So I will teach him chess. And in the process, we will codify all the rules and we will program we'll do a little chess program as our first program instead of Hello World. So that's how I started on
Nice.
in computers, and I fell in love with it because it was the same kind of physics and math, but now applied to computers. So that's how I got it. So that was kind of a giant step of
That's
kind of
awesome.
finding something that I really love. So the next and the last step for me was, again, for each of them, I have to tell you the background. India, as much as I like, there are many things I love about the culture. I think there is a focus on consciousness, which is very deep. The human relations, the way people relate to each other is from the heart. There are very deep relationships, friends and family relationships, very deep. So these are some of the amazing things about the Indian culture. The respect for knowledge and education but it is a traditional society. And so one of the things that I really faced in the initial stage was that I like to ask questions. I like to understand things. And when I did that for physical world, everybody thought it was the greatest thing and they loved it. But when I tried to do that about human beings, I say, okay, why do we do this? Why do we treat these people this way and that people that way? Why do we say these things? Why should I do it? And that was considered very rude. And people were what do you mean why? This is how we do things. There is a term in Hindi called hamare mein, means in our community, this is how we do things. And that is almost taken as given. And I never liked that. So for me, I was and like most people in the traditional Indian culture don't even ask the questions, what do I want to do with my life? They ask the question, what am I supposed to do? And they look to their family or their community to make all the critical decisions for them. What profession do you take? Who do you marry? What friends do you keep? All of those things, and many, many more. So I never liked that. So for me, there are a couple of things. One was America, kind of discovery of America. Then there was a book called Fountainhead by Ayn Rand, which actually captures the issue like a laser beam of individual initiative versus kind of depending on society to shape your values. That distinction is captured most powerfully in that book. And I read that when I was about 17 or 18. I also discovered America. I said, there are places where people are not like this. People think that people are individuals, and each individual chooses their own path, chooses their own value, chooses their own friends, and everything about their lives. So I kind of fell in love with America, and I came here. Now, most immigrants, firstly, again, I want to say a little bit about immigrants, because being an immigrant is actually a very courageous thing. You're leaving behind everything that you know, all your connections, all your family, all your friends, and going to a new place, and you're starting over. Okay, it's a fantastic, it requires a courage. Most immigrants, though, in their heart, they remain of the place that they were. It's only their children that become fully adopt the new country, the new adopted country. But for me, I truly love America and the amount of freedom that it gives, its focus on the individual. So I really took this, I really fell in love with it and tried to find out everything about it, tried to learn. Because the way I see it is that being an immigrant gives you an opportunity to be born again, if you will. Most people learn what they are fairly early when they do not have the capacity of evaluating too much, and all of it becomes part of their habit. And most of the ways in which they operate, they never actually challenge. Now, immigrants have the opportunity of doing that, because you suddenly are moving from one place where you took everything, some things as kind of normal and given, and of course you do this, to another place where completely different things are taken for granted. And you have the opportunity of asking yourself, what is it that I actually care about? What do you think is the best? Which one should I choose? Or maybe none of these two, maybe a third possibility. So as a full adult, you can choose to kind of remake yourself. And so so America, and I'm very, very grateful for that. So that kind of is the beginning. So that's the first of the three pieces.
I want to ask just briefly, I know this is a little off topic. Are there any pieces of the Indian culture that you came from that you decided to keep?
The way it happens is that change is very hard.
Yeah.
And it happens in a back and forth way. So for me, and I think it happens for many people, maybe not, but for me, it was like initially when I left India and came to America, I said, I just love America. I want everything about America. And I just did not want to do much, have to do much with India for a long period of time as I was taking in this new place. But once I took in everything and felt that I was standing, I had my feet firmly on the ground over here, then actually I looked back and realized two things, that there are some things that I missed dearly. And secondly, most fundamentally, that I actually am Indian in a very deep way in some aspects. Some of the values of India, for example, love of learning, that is there in India. There isn't an equivalent of that in the West. The only kind of subculture where some of that exists is the Jewish culture. They have the kind of reverence. It's a reverence. It's not, oh, it will be nice. No, it's reverence. It's like, that's what you do as a human being. And your worth is how hard are you trying to learn and how much do you learn. That's one value. At another level, I love Indian food. The taste is developed very early and that remains with you. And the third thing is focus on consciousness. That's something that India has been doing for about 5,000 years. So just the level of concepts there, which I grew up with, are a core part of me. So the primary way in which I have kind of gone back in a big way to Indian culture is that around 4 or 5 years ago, I started singing Indian classical vocal music. And that was a transforming experience, because that's the great thing, is that I grew up in a family which was a literary family. So some of the top musicians used to come and stay at our place and do their practice and performances at home. So I have learned all of that. And the way in which music works is that kind of, those layers are there in your brain. So when you sit down to sing, all of that is expressed. So that really matters.
Cool. Awesome.
Okay. So the next, so shall I tell you about the next stage? The next stage is about my love of learning taken to a completely new level.
Absolutely. Yeah. Bring us to phase 2.
Okay. Phase 2. So phase 2, so I started working, I did my master's in computer science, and then I worked for Microsoft for several years. So I worked on the Windows 95 team, on the UI. So when you bring up your computer, the start button, I was in the team that designed that. So it was a great time to be at Microsoft. That's where all the kind of action was happening. I loved it. I worked very, very hard. I got my green card. I, kind of felt kind of settled. But at the same time, what happens is that I realized that the thing that I was not able to study in India, human beings, I started studying, once I moved to America. And I was studying that on the side. And then I decided that My mind is naturally very curious, and I like to study many different things. And I found that was not, I couldn't do that within within uh, within the company, because it was focused mostly on technology. I wanted to do a wider variety of things. So I quit, and I tried to study everything. It was a very difficult decision to quit. Or in one sense, it was easy because this is something I really loved doing. So I quit and tried to study everything on my own. So I studied philosophy and psychology and history and business, art and science, just everything. I found that I was uneducated. Though I had a master's, most of the things, like for example, math and physics I had. But for example, biology, I did not. I actually hated biology when I studied, or geography or history, because they were, the way they were taught as rote, that you need to remember things. You need to remember these are the different parts of the organism, and this is what they're called, or this is the geography, these are the places, or these are the sequence of kings. Kind of the living principles behind them were never. So I discovered that, biology is far more beautiful once you understand evolution and how kind of biological processes work. Your understanding of biology, it's completely different. And so I found that field after field. So I spend a lot of time studying everything. And that time I was just mostly kind of doing a little bit of investment and studying. That's all I was doing. I had a few friends here and there that I would talk to once in a while. But mostly I was just studying on my own. So that was a very big switch from being, having a career in a tech company to going and trying to study everything. But the next step, so the next switch was, I realized, internet had come about, and three of my friends were had started internet company, and I was very curious about that. And so I decided to join. And that was a very big thing, because what I realized was that I've always worked hard. I worked very hard. I worked typically 80 hours a week. And so for several years, 80 hours a week, I was studying on my own. Mm. And what I found is that when I started working part-time, I was spending 20 hours in a business. I found that actually I was beginning to apply every idea that I was studying to whatever it is that I was doing. So I found that the efficiency of the rest of the 60 hours was actually more. I was studying and understanding more as a result of working for 20 hours. Then I extended that to 40 hours and then 60 hours. So I started, so that's where I got the idea that, okay, unless you apply the ideas that you're studying, you're actually not studying them. You have to have this kind of feedback mechanism where you're using the ideas in action and trying to learn from that to correct. So it gives you a crucial feedback mechanism. So that was another definite switch. Then in terms of ideas, the biggest thing that happened to me was I'd already come across how to read a book, which was just profound.
Amazing. If anyone has not read that, you need to stop anything you're reading, go read how to read a book, and then you can come back to it. It will absolutely change the way that you read anything.
Yes, and if you have any hesitation doing that, watch our video that Chase, me, John, and Zach produced, introducing of what the book has done for us. So I already had that, but the most deepest and widest application of that has ever been attempted is called the great books of the Western world. And that's what I got into. I mean, let me tell you about what it is, because that's really core to who I am now, and core to the meetups as well. This is a project done it's a joint project between Encyclopedia Britannica and University of Chicago, done about 70 years ago. And what they did was that they said they thought that people were focused on just the current fad of ideas that were around, and they were losing the perspective of the entire Western canon. So they wanted to make all the thinkers more accessible to everybody. So in order to do that, they collected all the philosophers, psychologists, economists, novelists, scientists, all in this giant set. And they called it the great books of the Western world. But the most amazing thing that they did was that they conceptualized this as a conversation. So they called it the great conversation, because that's actually what great thinkers do. They take in everything that has come before them, and then they add their own thoughts. And then these people who put it together ask a very interesting question. They said, what do these people talk about? And they identified first 4,000, and then they narrowed it down to 103 great ideas. These are the foundations of the Western conversation. So these are ideas like change and courage and law. It's a whole, it basically covers every field. And what they do is that they have nice little essays, about 8 to 10 page essays, that give you a complete overview of all the questions that have been raised on that topic throughout history by everybody, and all the essential answers that have been given across history. And what I did was that I went through all those 103 ideas with a friend. So both of us would read this, one idea per week, and we would discuss it. And we would discuss it in great amount of detail and try to make all the possible connections we could across time, across ideas, across thinkers. And what happens is that as you go through this process, you basically see ideas as living things. You see how, when they are born, and under what circumstance they are born, how they grow, how sometimes they die. So there is this entire life cycle of ideas, which most people do not get. Now, the thing about this is that each of us is using those ideas, whether we like it or not, because these are the ideas we need in order to direct our lives. And you do not really, if you do not understand the ideas and where they are coming from, you are kind of like a baby. You can see the idea and you can see, oh, this is new. But if you know the history of the idea and the impact of the idea throughout history, you understand the idea at a completely different level. So that project completely changed my life, I think, because what happens is that we are creatures of habit. We get used to thinking about things a certain way, and we never question most of those things. This allows you, going through this project allows you to question each of your ideas from every major perspective on it. Now, these are ideas of the past. Some people will say, oh, but we are focused on new ideas. The beautiful thing is that only if you understand the past, you can actually understand which ideas are genuinely new. And you are able to say, you're actually able to spot a new idea, which you will not be able to see before, because you would just see that, oh, this is something new to you. Here you are able to say, this is something radically new that is being presented. So that project was the one that completely changed my way of thinking.
Are there any ideas that you remember specifically striking you from that book that really made you question your perspective? Or was it every single one just you had that same reaction of wow, like there's a lot here?
Right. I mean, the interesting thing is that this is a very different perspective. Yes, there are some ideas that struck me more than others, But the primary function of this is to kind of evaluate all your ideas.
Yeah.
And what happens is that most people go by emotion of their immediate reaction to the idea. So there were some ideas. For example, the idea of language was the one that really blew me away. I'd never thought about that before. Or idea of virtue, for example, just the entire depth of thought on virtue. Idea of will was a huge idea. So these were some of the huge ideas, but that's not important. That's not important because the whole thrust of the project is that you get all the key ideas and you will find that in some innocuous idea, you learn something. So for example, I'm not a religious person. And one of the first ideas is angel. I said, why should I study angels? But the core part of it is that angel is a concept that connects a person to their ideal. He's like a messenger. He's like a go-between. Now that idea is very profound. There are go-betweens between where you are and where you're trying to go. And all the discussion on angels is actually, once you formulate it that way, you can actually get a lot from that. Because that particular aspect of somebody being the harbinger, the messenger, the inspirer, all of that, that's a crucial idea that has not been separated out in the conversation. So that's just to give you an example of an idea which you think is the most uninteresting idea will produce something that integrates with all other ideas.
Okay, so I'm glad that you gave an example because I think there are a lot of people who, with good intentions, genuinely consider themselves explorers of the world, but and might even have said to themselves, oh yeah, I've hit ideas like that where I've hit ideas where it sort of challenged my perception of things. But the nice thing about hearing a specific example and hearing what your reaction is to that example and how it expands is that I think that makes it a little easier to identify. If you're someone who is interested in exploring the world, you can survey until you recognize that emotion that Shrikant just explained, right? You can survey until you get to an idea you think is uninteresting or get to an idea where you say to yourself, why should I study that? And you do it anyway, and you feel that sort of explosion of, oh, this is actually something I can get something from. Then you're really exploring and challenging your ideas. I mean, obviously there are many ways to do that, but those are the kinds of things that change your perspective. So yeah.
Absolutely. But I will add to that. I mean, this is one category of things, but there are other category of impacts that ideas have on you.
Absolutely.
So for example, the idea of language, it was just so chock full of so many new things that my mind was completely blown by that. I said, what is this? I did not know that language was such a deep topic, deep human topic, and so many things are impacted by it. So it was like an explorer of that. Or take an idea of virtue, where you can kind of say, there's some ideas where you say, okay, this is a simple idea, but it actually is a foundation of a lot of things. So there are each idea has its own character, and you appreciate this kind of nature of ideas as you go on.
Cool. All right, carry on.
All right, so that was phase number 2. Now we come to phase number 3, and again, this brings me back to New York. I was traveling in a subway, and somebody just got on subway whose meetup I had attended once. And so I said, Yan, hi, nice to see you. So we got to talking about what we were working on. And I always am excited about talking about what I'm thinking about. Just
Mhm.
telling him about this 103 great ideas that I've been working on. And he said, oh, you should do a meetup about that. So I said, how can I find really serious thinkers to come and discuss these 103 great ideas? It's too much work. He says, no, I'll help you. And, thanks to, he's part of Ronald Gross's organization, Conversations New York. So they're trying to encourage conversations. So they said, you don't have to do anything. I'll just make you a event organizer for my meetup. So you can just try it out and see what you think. I said, sure. So first time I had 9 people show up. The second time I had 15. The third time it was 25. All the people who came before kept coming back, and new people kept on adding. And it was incredible. And it just kept growing and growing. And then soon I said, wait a minute, I'm actually firstly, whenever you're making a presentation, it's great because most of the value you get is from preparing for the presentation.
Mm-hmm.
But by my nature, I like to learn things. So this wasn't enough for me to be doing things and telling great things to other people. I wanted to learn. So then I decided that I would start doing meetups only on things I was studying, only things that I was, and it turned out, it was generally in the area of psychology, philosophy, and personal growth. That was the general areas. And I would pick topics that I was studying. And by then I was getting like between 30 to 80 people every Saturday coming on a regular basis. So let's say 50 people. So suppose 50 people show up. Of those 50 people, there would be 10 people who would know a lot more than I did. And I would learn so much from them. Okay, so that was a very easy way for me of really accelerating my learning, getting people there who would know a lot, okay? And then there would be 35 people who did not know much about the topic, but were very interested in it. And they were from all kinds of backgrounds. So they would ask questions from all kinds of angles. So that would force me to clearly explain my ideas, deal with all the objections, consider all kinds of viewpoints that I had not considered before. Okay, so that was great. And then there would always be 5 people who would show up because they hated what I was saying. Okay, so I had to be able to defend myself against that. And what I found is that in that cauldron, I was learning much faster. I was catching my mistakes earlier. I was clarifying whatever it is that I had swept under the rug or whatever it is that I had not noticed. So it was a crucial feedback mechanism. And then I started building on it because then I said, soon what happened was that, I was kind of noticing things. Okay, I was saying, look, these people who are coming to my meetups and who really like my meetups and keep coming back are different from many, many other people. And what's the difference? Okay, what's the difference? So, I put it in various ways. So first thing is that they were interested in conversation, but the kind of conversation that they were interested in was different than most conversations. So that's where I kind of came up with my understanding of conversations. Like what is called conversation is actually many kinds of different things, at least 4 different things that I know of. The first kind of conversation is I call verbal grooming. Just like monkeys groom each other with their hands, people groom each other with words. That's what small talk is about. I'm not criticizing it. I'm saying the function of it is kind of social comity, of saying, I'm nice, you're nice, let's not hurt each other, let's get along. Something like that, okay? But that's all that is being done. The second kind of communication is a hierarchy-based communication where people are signaling to each other that I am at a higher level than you. Now, this may be done in a very sophisticated way, but that's what is going on. Everybody is trying to say, okay, I'm better in some way, okay? So that's kind of signaling and hierarchy-based communication. The third one only appears to be a conversation. What appears to be a conversation is people simply waiting to talk. Okay, they have no intention whatsoever of actually listening to the other person. They just they have something in their heart and they just want to express it. Okay. What I found is that the kind of people that were coming were interested in a fourth kind of conversation, which I am interested in. And that, I call it the joint exploration of the world, ourselves, and ideas. So joint exploration. So the idea is this, that they had two characteristics. One is that they were serious in the sense that regardless of anybody else, regardless of this meetup, they would be seriously trying to understand things. That's what they did. Okay, so that was one, they were serious. Second is that they were curious. They understood that the world is very complex and they themselves are very complex. And they are trying very hard, but they understand only some things. If this other person is trying to do the same thing, maybe they might teach them something. So you actually listen to the other person, hoping to learn something. And if it turns out that they are right and you are wrong, you're actually grateful to them because you're not trying to prove to them that you're right. You actually want to be right. And so you welcome kind of criticism, you welcome different ideas, and because you're trying to just understand the world. And doing it together enables all the parties to do it faster. So that's what that's what the meetups ended up being. It attracted these people. We have about like 300 regulars, out of which maybe 40 of them would show up every time, maybe 20 new people. Now, people who had the same kind of values ended up, saying, wait a minute, normally I have had to, throughout my life, I've been able to collect a handful of such people with whom I can talk like this. And suddenly there are 30 people who can do this. What is this place? So that was the reaction that people had. And it was very special. And I'd not fully realized, internalized, because I'm always trying to kind of work on the next thing. And I not fully grasped how much it meant to people until my last birthday. What happened was that all these folks came and gave me a birthday present. And it was a little bag with a book in it. So I took it home and I tore the side of the cover of it to see what the book it was. And it was Bartlett's book of quotations. So I said, why did these people give me that? So I didn't even open it, okay? And I just kept it. And then somebody calls me and asks me, did you open the present? So I said, no, not yet. But then I was wondering, why did they call specifically to ask me whether I opened this Bartlett's book of quotations? So I opened it. And what they had done is that they had hollowed out that entire book. And there were 50 letters in there. These were handwritten letters. Okay, they were from a small card to 5-page letters written by individuals, okay, talking about what this meetup had meant to them and how big a part of their life it had become and what it had done for them. I mean, it just blew me away. And what I realized is that this is something special, that we're doing something which is extremely valuable to the people who value it. And so that was a big revelation.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the story of the meetup. And so how do you get from, before we go back and visit some of the ideas, I want to finish out the story. How do you get from that point to the current situation? What is the meetup now and how did we get here? Okay,
so there are two remaining points in that, two remaining switches. The first thing is that moment I realized that, look, this is actually something that people care about so much. I said, I need to make it available. I need to scale it up. Okay, I need to scale it up. And I started thinking about how do I scale it up? Because a lot of it is actual people interacting with one another, and you actually build a community. How do you scale that up? I think we've done a decent job in New York, but still, New York is a great city. A lot is possible in New York too. Plus, there is the entire world out there. How do you reach? How do you scale it up? How do you maintain the same level of camaraderie, the same level of kind of the deep connection, the same level of kind of learning, same level of kind of seriousness and curiousness? How do you kind of transport this culture across space? So my first take on that is that I made a list of all the ideas which have been fundamental to this meetup. Because what happens is that, ideas, we need ideas in order to live. And there are certain ideas which were the foundation that all of us, or most of us in the meetup, took for granted. And what I did was that I said, okay, I'm going to write a book, which is a very, very short book. I called it 52 Living Ideas. I was planning to call it 50 Living Ideas, but Chase pointed out to me that 52 is once a week. We meet once a week. And it makes the point that this is something that you need to do on a regular basis. And this is something that should be a core part of your life. So I love the move to 52. So I called it 52 Living Ideas. And I started writing the book. So the idea was to publish the book and then use the book to create an online community, get the book out there, and then use that to do that. Then I was talking to a friend of mine, and I said, so this is my plan to do that. Because again, I learned to kind of talk about my ideas very openly with people. Mm-hmm. And he said, wait a minute, if you want to scale up, because I'd been, I'm a big fan of Louis Sullivan, whose idea is form follows function. He says, if you want to scale up the meetup, why don't you just scale up the meetup? So what do you mean? He said, just scale it up, make it available to more people. So I said, let me think. Oh, so if I did like a online version of it, and this was like about 2-3 weeks before COVID hit. So this was completely independent of COVID. So I said, I'm going to start. So I started doing hybrid meetups where there would be 30 people in front of me, and we would be engaging in dialogue. At the same time, there would be on Discord at that time, another maybe 20-30 people online. And what I would be doing is that I would be wearing this, I would be making a presentation which is heard in both sides, both in person and online. And then questions that are asked from the floor, I would repeat so people could hear it. People who would type in the questions, I would read out to everybody and go from there. So it was a hybrid version of it. And unfortunately, a week or two after that, I started that, COVID hit, so we couldn't meet in person anymore. And I knew how much this community meant to me, and I didn't want to lose it. So I started doing the meetups. I started doing the meetups 3 times a week, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. And then I expanded that to every day, because I found that, social distancing we need to do in order to protect our bodies, but we are social beings, and we need, especially in times like this, you need to focus, you need to be reminded of, you need to hold on to the thing that you care about most. And so that's why I moved it from once a week to every day. And to my pleasant surprise, all kinds of people, though I was not trying anything in particular at that time, started showing up from different places. It was, mostly kind of recommendation of friends. Then I reached out to other people, like, for example, Stoicism. I reached out to other Stoic groups. And they started, philosophy groups, they started carrying my meetups. And I suddenly started finding that there are people coming from, Toronto and Seattle and Philadelphia and Texas. And then I said, look, this looks like this is of great interest to people. So I went whole hog. I'm actually doing an experiment now where I'm running meetups of my own in 20 different cities across the world. These are in addition to kind of working with meetups, established meetups focused on philosophy and psychology and personal growth. In addition to that, I'm putting my meetups where there isn't anything. So I have meetups in London, Amsterdam, Bombay, Sao Paulo, Montreal, and pretty much every city in the US. And this is an experiment. I want to see how it works. And so far, it's going very well.
Boston.
Boston, yes, everything. Boston, DC. Let me see what else. LA, San Francisco. What's that?
I said awesome.
Awesome. Oh, I thought you
Boston's good too.
were advocating. Yeah. Yeah. So that's what ended up happening. So I was able to, and my vision, I mean, the next phase, so kind of going online was the 9th switch.
Mm-hmm.
The 10th switch I want to do. And what I want to do is that I think this is something that everybody needs. And what I'm doing is that I'm working very hard with speakers everywhere, whether it is the series on Stoic philosophers or the Jungian analysts coming and talking about Jung. I'm trying to work with every meetup I can to get the content that they are. So like, I want to invite people to come to this meetup and present. So that's one level. The second level, this too shall pass. We are going to get out of COVID. And as soon as that is done, the position I want to be in is that I want to have enough interest in many cities across the world so that we can start running in-person hybrid meetups everywhere. So we would have people getting together in Seattle and Toronto and London and Bombay in person. I'm getting to know some amazing people everywhere. And I'm going to be working hard with them. So by the time that time comes along, we would have a lot of great content for them. We would have kind of speakers for them. And we would actually have in-person meetups going on, throughout the world. So that's something. And if you want to support that, you're welcome to do that. I have a Patreon, so it's patreon.com 52 Living Ideas. You can support us there. And it'll enable me to expand faster. I'm going to do it anyway, but it's just the scale of it. I want to see what is possible here. I think this is something that world needs, because one thing that is different about our meetup is that people on the left and people on the right come to the meetup. People who are atheist and people who are, into religion come to the meetups. People from every economic background, people who are struggling and people who are really doing well come to the meetup. And they all talk to each other about all those issues and are able to do that. I think that's valuable itself. And I think people are actually open to hearing the other people. So all of that, I want to see what is possible. I really don't know what is possible. I think, I'm from New York, so I'm very, very ambitious. And I've seen what New York is and New York can do. But, New York is just the epicenter. I'm using this as a base. There are so many great people over here. So I've already kind of created the fire of a really good core group of people here. And I'm adding to it at various places. But I want to kind of have these kind of fires going everywhere, where it's not just in one place. So that's the 10th thing, which I'm in the process of doing.
Awesome. Wow. Yeah. So I had heard bits and pieces of this story previously, but I had never put the whole thing together. So that was awesome. Thank you.
I do want to say one thing. I mean, I am really indebted to Chase, because he's been my right-hand person for the past 2-3 years. I mean, whenever I was traveling, he's done meetups in my place. Whenever there is anything, it's just amazing how much support he has given. So, Chase, thank you very much. Really, really appreciate that.
I appreciate the kind words, and I'm happy to contribute because I get a lot out of this. So maybe it's purely selfish, but I'm happy to contribute. So I do have a couple of questions for you. I want to talk
Sure.
about the characteristics that you found in people who are interested in this joint exploration type of conversation. You mentioned people who are serious and curious. Do you think that those are traits that people in general, like the people you've come across, are those traits that those people are just inherent with? Or do you think those are traits that people have learned? Do you think it's some mix? Like how do people become serious and curious? And really the reason I'm asking is because I want to know, how do I encourage people to become more serious and curious? How do I encourage people to increase, like level up that type of exploration of the world?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I have found it very difficult to actually get a person to be serious and curious. The best thing that I've been able to do is to focus on areas where they are serious and curious, because it's not just one, it's not along just one dimension. What happens is that different people are different, and in some areas in their life, they are like that. So if you can connect to that, that helps. The second thing that helps is just an example. Actually, many people would come saying that, oh, this is really cool. This is really interesting what these people are doing. And then they connect with some people there. So I think having a group helps. So a person who is coming in, there is not just this one thing. So we're providing not only a whole set of topics, but we are providing a whole set of people. The way we have structured the meetup is deliberately structured so that it allows deep person-to-person conversation in the breakout rooms over here or in our small groups. And then after the small groups, we used to go to Pret to have coffee. And what it does is that it allows people to connect with anybody that they can connect with. And I think it is through personal example and kind of leveraging their already existing strengths. Those are the only ways I know how.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think, I mean, you can't force someone to have that attitude about life. But I think, like you said, leveraging the areas where they're already interested and sort of leading by example, that's part of what we've been trying to do with the switch. The only other thing, well, the tactic that we've used to try to to try to be examples for people in how to explore the world is just hitting a variety of topics. We've hit so many different areas that maybe just because I'm such a curious person, I'm interested in all of these things, but I know for sure I've heard from people who really liked certain episodes and just were not interested in other episodes. So hopefully we're able to encourage that across a wide variety of topics here as well. The next question, I really only have 2 more questions for you, and then we'll move on to the next segment. But I want to ask about the rules that you have for the meetup, because you actually have, and I don't know if you want to expose this trade secret, you have this interesting set of core rules for how to conduct discussions. I want to know, how did you figure those out, and why do you think that they work the way that they do?
Okay, it's really surprising. I'm surprised myself that I actually came up with that for the first meetup that I did with the 9 people. And that was, I think, just accident. I don't think I was particularly smart or anything like that. But I believe in changing, continuously evaluating the rules and kind of. So I would have kind of run into things, kind of figured them out over time. The whole point of the rules is to encourage the kind of conversation which is joint exploration of the world, and discourage the other communications, other kinds of conversations during that time. And all of them are designed for that. All the 4 rules are designed for that. So the 4 rules, the first one is to raise your hand. So if you have to raise your hand, and then what I do is that, I go to people in order in which they raise the hand in general. And with the exception that if a person has spoken before, they don't, they are kind of at the end of the line, because we want to hear as many different voices as possible. So what happens is that person who wants to just emotionally react to something, they don't get to emotionally react right then. So by the time, so they don't have the patience to do that, to raise their hands. Also, there is kind of back and forth is way in which hierarchies are established, typically by just putting people down or kind of passing. Those kind of things are not possible with the raise of hands. So it's like all the rules are designed to kind of move the conversation more towards the joint exploration. So first one is that. The second rule is keep on topic. Again, keep on topic is something that somebody is trying to explore a topic. Yes, of course, they want to keep on topic. That's what everybody has here. But the other 3 kinds of conversations don't really keep on topic. So again, they get very disappointed by that. Whereas the people who really came to discuss a topic, explore the world, they love it. Third is be brief. I tell people that, look, there is a lot of people, there's a lot of things you would like to hear from them. So keep what you're saying short so you can hear more from people. Again, that's something that is not good for those other 3 types. And the last one is very important, that, I ask people that be courteous. So I tell them that, speak your mind. Feel free to disagree with anybody that you want, but do so courteously. So that is kind of foundation of the curiosity of saying that you're not there just to broadcast your view or kind of ram your view down somebody else's throat. You're trying to actually listen to the other person and trying to relate to the other person. So I think those are the 4 rules, and they're not trade secret, because I repeat them like a broken record every time, because there are always new people, and I want that to be established.
Awesome. I know you listed many switches, but I want to see if we can zone in. What do you think, since beginning the meetup, what do you think has most changed your mind? What do you think was the biggest thing that, you thought one way when you first started, and now you realize that you think something completely different?
The biggest one by far is that I genuinely held that the way you learn things is by yourself, is you try very hard. And I do try very hard. And that's all you need in order to learn. That's, again, kind of part of my Indian tradition. That is, but the biggest thing I learned is that it's much better. I also thought that learning requires kind of solitude, in the sense that if you're thinking about something, it's a very delicate process. So you don't want to let anybody else in at that level. You should wait till you put everything together, and then you can talk to people. All of those, I think, are wrong. I think that ideas are better developed in the rough and tumble of the market rather than in the peace of a monastery. So that's the biggest thing that I learned.
Awesome. Were there any other subjects that you wanted to hit, or questions that you think I should ask you? What have we missed?
You had in the thing that you said that there was opportunity of talking about something completely different.
Yes.
Is that what this is, or that's later?
that's immediately following this. I just want to make sure that before we move on, and then we'll come back for Q&A. Before we move on, I want to make sure that you have a chance to, make sure that if there's anything I missed asking you about, that you were able to get it out.
No, I thought you did a great job.
Awesome. Well, in that case, we will move on to a segment that we like to call the off topic. For anybody who has never listened to The Switch before, this is just a quick explanation of the off topic. Basically, at the end of each of our interviews, we do this segment and our guest can bring up any topic they'd like. It can be lighthearted, it can be serious. It really doesn't matter what it is, as long as it's not directly related to the main topic. It can be a tangent. And we'll talk about it for 5 minutes. Just a way to be able to bring in some variety from each of our guests. So, Shrikant, what do you have for us?
Okay, so I'm going to tell you about my favorite book.
Perfect.
My favorite book is called Kindergarten Chats by Louis Sullivan. I read this book and I was so impressed by it that I bought like 32 copies of it. And I gave a copy to anybody whom I thought was good. Apparently, I knew 32 people at that time whom I thought were incredible. And it blew me away. Louis Sullivan is an architect, and his most famous idea is form follows function. And that idea has really changed my life. I mean, that's the biggest idea that I know. And it's the idea that I can come to at any point, and it produces all kinds of fascinating results that I never would have imagined. So it's the most powerful idea that I know. So I said, okay, I'll just give it to these people. They're so amazing people. They're going to just love it. And I had a most interesting experience. 1/3 of the people did love it. Okay, they said, wow, thank you. I mean, I can't believe it. 1/3 of the people say, oh, that's kind of interesting. And 1/3 of the people, why did you give me this? Okay, so it's like, that's very odd. I was completely surprised by it. Okay. So what I did was I said, why did this happen? So what happens is that when somebody is trying to figure out something radically new, initially when they present it in a metaphoric, they use lots of metaphors in order to refer to it. And Louis Sullivan in particular has a very flowery language. This book was written about 100 years ago, so the language is also different. So I said, okay, so that's why people are not getting it. So what I did was that I rewrote the whole book. I took the book, rewrote the whole thing, and published it on my blog. If you go to 52livingideas.com, there is one of the posts that connects to it. And so I rewrote the whole thing. I basically tried to use as much of his words as possible, but whatever was confusing, whatever was, I kind of shortened it mostly. And I'm saying, read this enough so that you go read the original. So that's how. So for example, at the back, there is a giant book over there. That's a book by Louis Sullivan. I had about 1,700 books in my library. I've got it down to 400 recently. And that's my most prized book. It's called System of Architectural Ornaments. And I included that form follows function as one of the 52 living ideas and wrote like two-page summary of it and tried to do a meetup on it. And I completely failed because I found that though it's a simple idea, that it's kind of part of me, managing to do that in like a single, page like this, two-page site I found it impossible. So unfortunately, it is not part of the 52 living ideas, though it's the most living of the ideas that I have.
So when you first told me about this idea, I think my reaction was somewhere between the second and third group of people that you gave the book to. It was like, oh, that's interesting. Why are we talking about this? And I think I probably chewed on it for a year because I knew that you were, for lack of a better term, obsessed with this idea. And I don't think it hit me until maybe 6-8 weeks ago what that really meant and how it impacts everything. And now I can't stop thinking about the idea of form follows function. So I do want to let you know that in one of the future interviews, we're going to be interviewing, I don't know if I want to say it yet. It's fine. We're going to be interviewing Mike Glover. He's a retired Green Beret. He's done a bunch of interesting, cool guy stuff. And he now runs a company that's focused on helping people be prepared for the worst case scenarios in various aspects of their life. Whether it's, medical emergencies or, natural disasters, things like that. The point is preparedness. And in that field, nobody talks about it, but that rule, that form follows function, is the difference between life or death. If you are packing a backpack, like there were, I forget whether it was mudslides or fires in California, and he told this story on his podcast of this guy who, it might have been a different podcast. Don't quote me on this. The point is the story where this guy and his family were in their house in the middle of the night. They hear a really loud knock on the door. They answer the door, and it's a firefighter who says, "You have 20 minutes to pack everything and leave. Get in the truck. You can't stay in your house anymore. Everyone's got to evacuate." And so, like, how do you pack your life in 20 minutes? It matters, because then you get on the truck. You don't know where you're going. You don't know how long it's going to take for FEMA to show up. So it matters what you pack in that backpack or in your suitcases or whatever. And if you're packing a backpack, you have to be able to carry it. You might have to walk really far. And if you pack things, if the form of what you've put in your backpack does not follow the function of get me through the next 24, 48, 72 hours before I can, get external help, that is literally life and death. So form absolutely follows function in the area of, preparedness and survival. But I mean, it applies to much, much more than that. But I'm going to bring that up with Mike, and we'll see what he thinks about it. I think he'll like it.
That was beautiful.
That idea is paramount, and I can't stop thinking about it now. It's awesome.
Excellent.
Cool. Okay. So next, we're going to switch into Q&A. For the sake of the length of the podcast, we're going to do 13 minutes of on-podcast Q&A, and then afterward, Shrikant, I'll let you sort of take over, and however you want to finish out the rest of the meetup, we'll do that. So if anybody wants to ask questions, go ahead and put either an exclamation mark in the chat or raise your hand in Zoom, and I'll call on you one by one. You can unmute, ask a question, just so that you do know this is all being recorded. Your voice and likeness will be on the podcast in its various forms if you should choose to speak. If you'd rather have one of us read your question, feel free to just pop it in the chat and I can read it and Shrikant will answer. So it looks like Joseph Bullock, you were the first to raise your hand. If you want to go ahead and unmute and ask a question, ask away.
Yes. First, thank you, Shrikant, for everything that you do and bringing your Indian tradition to us in learning and just living a well-examined life and helping others do that as well. You had mentioned actually before you read the 103 Great Ideas book that sometimes, I could ask 100 questions, but sometimes that you found a way to stop hitting your head against the wall, is the exact term that you used, when you're thinking about a problem. Can you give me an example of that, and just like what was the insight that allowed you to know when to stop researching something that wasn't necessarily providing any more benefit to yourself or a project or something?
Right. It's an excellent question. And Joe, I mean, it's wonderful to have you coming regularly, and I always appreciate your questions. So it's been a very difficult process for me to learn because I think the way I think about it is that each person's strengths and weaknesses are connected at the hip. So whatever strengths you have, so I have tremendous confidence in my ability to improvise. So I generally, whenever I see a problem, I say, oh, maybe I can do this, maybe I can do this, maybe I can do this. And I would keep on trying various things. And it has taken me a long time. Partly it is kind of realizing your weaknesses and your limits and seeing the patterns of your weaknesses and limits. The way I have actually ended up doing that the best is dealing with people who are strong at things that I'm weak at. So, because what happens is that when you are weak, even your ability to evaluate how good you are is very poor. So if you are interacting with people who are strong at that, you can say, wait a minute, I became twice as good, but I'm still 10% of what this person is. Okay, now what happens is that firstly, they can help you directly. You can make a deal with them and you can, so that you can kind of divide work between you so that you can have that. Second, dealing with them gives you an inspiration, not, firstly, it calibrates you of seeing where you are more objectively, because it's very easy for yourself to fool yourself about thinking that, oh, I'm making progress when you are not. Or though you're making progress, it's relatively mild. The other thing is that you can actually learn from them, because watching them in action is the best way of learning. So that, kind of honestly facing my weaknesses and dealing with people where they are, in which they are, where that is their strength, is the way in which I have kind of learned to see where my walls are and where the doors are.
Awesome. Next up is Jory from Vancouver, Washington. Jory. Jory, if you'd like to ask your question, you're going to have to unmute. There you go.
Thank you. So I find this fascinating and I'm very appreciative because I'm a newcomer. I heard about this from my local philosophy meetup. And so was this a financial project for you because it sounds like you're dedicating a good portion of your life to making these conversations and these ideas available to people. It's a very laudable program, and I'm very appreciative. But are you retired, or how are you able to scale up and for this project?
Okay, excellent question. See, I work very hard. I really love doing this. So I spend considerable amount of time doing this. Plus I have a full-time job, full-time plus job. So that's what I do. And the scaling up, I mean, I'm happy to accept, donations and stuff on Patreon. That will enable me to scale up, because what it does take a lot to kind of keep running meetups in all these different cities and stuff like that. And I'm kind of thinking outside the box of saying, okay, how do whatever I have done so far, I think is very small. Okay, though I have put a lot of effort in it, what I've done is very small, because there are all kinds of authors out there that I would like to bring. I want to bring this to more people. Okay, currently we get between 30 to 120 people each day. I can easily see that going to 500 people. There is no problem with that. And I would like to get there. And I would also like to kind of explore kind of many things. For example, I'm thinking of doing a series on these 103 great ideas, which I've already done. Yeah, I've done 50 of those ideas. Maybe I can convert that into something, because that would be like the most amazing outside university education that you can have, because that's like kind of taking in the entire Western corpus on every field without the professor kind of picking their favorites, and learning at a level where it is kind of flat, in the sense that you are all kind of learning from each other. So I have all kinds of things where I can do a lot more. So I perceive myself very differently than other people. I think I've not done much. This is very little that I'm doing, because there is a lot more to be done. I think these ideas are important, and I think these ideas are important to a lot of people. And I want to see what that can do.
Excellent. All right. Next up is Jeff Nugent. Jeff, hit us.
Hey, Chase and Shrikant. It really has been wonderful to share these times with you for about a year now for me. And it's great to see it grow. And thanks for this story. So Shrikant, it strikes me that in a way, given the magnitude and the length of the impact of the changes that we're all confronted with at the moment, that it's a little bit like we're all immigrants in this new age. And I hadn't really thought about it that way until you reflected on your own experience. And I wonder if and you could answer just one of these or all three of them if they strike you. You know, what do you think we should consider leaving behind? And how might we decide that? But I mean, you know, that, and then second, is there anything in particular that comes to you that might be important for us to recognize and keep, to preserve for ourselves? And last, how might we decide what we should explore in the new things that we should, you know, seek and become exposed to? So, you know, what should we leave behind? What might we recognize and keep? And what should we explore?
Okay, Jeff, great question as always. And again, it's wonderful to have you kind of an integral part of the meetup for about a year. You know, just I'm very honored. So I was talking to a friend of mine. So one thing I did after you know, once this COVID hit and we were all kind of stuck at home, is that I made a list of everybody who has touched my life while I've been in America, and I called all of them on Zoom and talked to all of them. There were like 75 people. It had grown from 33 people back then when I read the Louis Sullivan book to about 77, which is great. And I did Zoom calls with them. And one thing I realized is that all of us are now in the same neighborhood. You know, like when I'm meeting with you, Jeff, I'm meeting you on Zoom, just like my friend in San Francisco, or a friend of mine who has moved to Shanghai or Australia. We are all in the same neighborhood. I think that's what has changed. So I think what we have to leave behind is the scale of what is possible. I think I'm thinking, even whatever I've said, I think I'm thinking too low. I'm thinking too low. That's what really scares me. And I think I'm not making use of this opportunity. This is a far greater opportunity than what I have done. So the limitations that we are saying of what is possible to do, given that we are in the same neighborhood, I think that's one of the things. What can we keep? I think the idea of kind of joint exploration of the world, of world, ourselves, and ideas is something that we need to keep, because I think that is the foundation of the great community that we have, and that's what enables us. So that's why my idea is just to scale up the meetup. That's how I kind of keep reminding myself, I'm just scaling up the meetup. I want everything to have the same quality, the same kind of camaraderie, the same depth as our meetups have. And how we might explore further is simply, the beautiful thing is that I think that's just a result of welcoming people from everywhere. You know, we have who comes from Singapore. We have Joe who comes from Philadelphia. We have Dave who comes from Seattle. We have Adrian who comes from Montreal. We have Richard who comes from London. Now, these are regulars. okay? And they are contributing. And the thing is that they bring their own perspective, which is different. So they are going to bring in kind of exploratory things. So all their exploration is going to get added to the exploration that we are doing. So that would be my my answer. Thanks.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Shrikant, for doing this interview. We will continue the Q&A post-podcast recording, I imagine. For anybody who wants to learn more about the meetup, become part of all of this, I know you mentioned it once, but here's the official plug time. How do people get involved in this project?
Well, very easy. You can go to 52livingideas.com. That's our website. There are 3 things that you can do. Number 1, you can come to the meetups. So that is meetup.com/52livingideas. That's where you find out all the meetups. Number 2, we have a YouTube channel. And Chase will post all these 3 links.
Yep.
And number 3, you can support us on Patreon. So those are the 3 things that I've set up.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you very much, Shrikant. Any final words before we end the podcast recording?
Well, Chase, thank you very much. This has been a delight.
Absolutely. For me as well. Thank you very much. All right. And
excellent. Now we can, Chase, we can do more questions.
Okay. Go for it. Let's see who's next. Kavita, I believe you are next.
Good evening, sir. Thank you for sharing your journey and the way you learn things and the way you are sharing it back to us. It's really inspiring. And you set a very good example for immigrants, I believe, that to rise to this level. So my question was, if you had still been back in our country, do you think you would have evolved to this extent? And the second part of my question is, if a person basically struggles for his day-to-day living, will that limit his curiosity to do things, or he would like to change his circumstances and he would become more serious to seek knowledge? So
excellent question, Kavita. And again, thank you for being a regular here. So the first question is that I think what happens is having a dramatically different change of context is a great base for transformation. If you live in the same place, interact with the same people, do the same thing, the chance that you can learn too much different from what you know is very little. So I think, I don't think I would have been able to do as much if I had remained in India. The fact that I moved to America, I mean, I'm not saying just America, I'm saying if you just a person who leaves their place, this would apply to a person in village going to Bombay, because Bombay is as much of a dramatic immigration as a person from Bombay coming to New York. So I think fundamental change in life is necessary for learning. And absolutely, people who are struggling to feed themselves, it's very difficult for them. This is one of the things that we have to be grateful for the prosperity that we have, that we can actually do this. So it's like the Maslow's hierarchy. It is difficult to pursue higher goals without the lower goals. Take the next question.
Next is Francoise.
Hi, good night. Well, thank you, Shrikant. I think I may have been one of the 9 people.
Yes, you were one of the 9 4 years ago.
And it's been really a pleasure. And I must say also that we share a similar background, being an immigrant by choice, not by necessity, and taking this country to get the best of ourselves. I really admire your strengths for very, very hard work. You know, it's a base of great success. And in relation to your way of raising the bar so high, I'm wondering what kind of measurement you're using to see how you succeed. And after that success and the way you measure it, how do you see the change in the world, you know, to become better? You know, what's your vision of the world after the success of getting people understanding better and working together?
So firstly, I'm just delighted that you're here, because you're the first one who is there at the first meetup, and you're here. So that's speaking some good. And I know most of the people who are there. They're still kind of regulars. So what I would say about measurement. So the question, measurement and the world. See, I don't know that much about changing the world. I know what I know. I know what my strengths are, and my strengths are focused on kind of exploring. Exploring is something that I'm good at. So I'm going to measure everything with that as a base of how much exploration can be done. Now, that is one of the steps, like, you know, like the motto that we have, it's kind of explore, transform, nurture, and grow. So those are the 4 steps. And the step that I'm most focused on is exploration. So what I'm trying to do is to kind of create as big a base of exploration. And there are going to be many things that come out of that. So for example, there is one friend of mine whom I used to do the similar things, except that we would just, you know, he would travel all the way from New Jersey. He would travel 2 hours to meet with me on Saturday, and we would talk about all kinds of issues. He went and started a great company, you know, doing 3D printing, and his 3D printing machines NASA has bought to put in the spaceship, you know, space station. So so there are kind of different things, you know. He's very good at doing kind of the transformation part. So lots of other effects will be there, but I'm not able to kind of evaluate them, to measure them, because I'm not particularly good at them. I'm good at the exploration part. So I'm measuring everything by that. So I'm measuring, and I'm keeping track of how many people come, what is the engagement of people, how people feel about the breakout rooms, what is the rate at which people keep coming back, geographically, what kind of reach that we have, how fast are we exploring them, what kind of content that we have, how sticky is the content, the quality of the content. So I'm measuring it all by kind of exploration. But that's just my strength. I'm just sticking to that.
Awesome. Next is Sean, Philadelphia.
Yeah, so like you, I have a very curious mind, and I seem to have a hard time focusing my curiosity on any one thing. So my question to you is along the lines of, how do you focus your curiosity and determine what learning endeavor has the greatest value, and decide to put aside other lesser endeavors on the shelf for later?
Okay, excellent question. What I've found is that there are few people, there are some people who are some thinkers who can really blow me away at a given point of time in life. And their depth is so, you know, they have such depth that they have the power to kind of transform my life. Louis Sullivan was one of them. Leonardo Da Vinci was one of them. And when I do find them, so for example, when I was studying Leonardo da Vinci, I actually traveled from Seattle to LA to look at one of his notebooks, Codex Atlanticus, which turned out to be, quote unquote, that notebook turned out to be basically something like 13 notebooks, each of which was about this thick and about 3 foot long and 2 foot wide. And they had to be brought to me on a little truck, like mini crane. so I've done that. I've also gone to like Florence and Louvre and spend hours there. And what I find is that you kind of, when you find something that deep, you focus on it. But the thing is that other part of it is that I run many things in parallel. So they are always competing against one another to find those things. So there is a continuous process of kind of exploring possibilities. And then when you find a vein, which is very deep, where there is a lot of gold, then you go digging. But you keep exploring the other things in order to find. So that's like the two-part thing that I do.
All right. Unless there are any other last-minute contributions, it looks like we've reached the end of the line for questions.
Wonderful. So now it's time to go to the breakout rooms. So I'm going to divide you into groups. Just hold on tight. And I just want to say thank you very much for coming. This is delightful.
All right. That's also my cue to go to bed. So thank you, everyone, for coming. Appreciate it. Thank you, Shrikant, again, for
thank you very much.
interviewing.
Thanks.
All right.
See you
Take care,
soon.
everybody.